I don't remember many people shitting on him for doing it. People were really accepting, kind of going,
they're
going
just
down
going
different.
with it, yeah, see where they're going and I'll follow them along.
Yeah, and then kind of like, oh God, Beneath Broken Earth, I can't remember the name of that album. But the last 3 albums, like Medusa and Obsidian and that album, they're fucking, like, talk about, like, proper heavy doom kind of a thing. But they're just amazing. Greg McIntosh, or Gregor McIntosh or whatever, like the guitar playing is fun. All of them, they're just amazing musicians, but they would have been kind of, I suppose, chugging along during the 90s, like influencing all these different scenes around and kind of like being there playing around, but not really getting
the recognition
they deserved. But I suppose in similar kind of a pattern, Typo Negative, who will be talking, I think in the next couple of weeks we'll be talking about Pete Steele and all that. But Typo Negative, I suppose, could be easily thrown in to the alternative metal thing as well, where it's kind of like gothy,
bit doomy, a little bit
doomy, kind of anyone that's their cover version of Black Sabbath is fucking, it's the way Black Sabbath should sound. But Pete Steele, they just seem like a lovely bunch of guys as well. Like, we'll talk about Pete Steele, but their music was great because they had that kind of like comedy element to it as well, but musical talent to go along with it, which was kind of like fucking. And they had the look as well, where a lot of people do kind of like, this is the thing that was really funny about the 90s, where people were like, we're going away from the look isn't important, but it kind of was.
Yeah, you had to look somewhat cool on stage, and you had to pull it off. Otherwise, you're just a bunch of lads up with your guitars or whatever.
You had to have the imagery.
Pete Steele was imposing, and he had the long jet black hair, and he just looked sullen and imposing, and all. It helps that he was like fucking 7 foot tall or something like that.
Well, listen, I was looking at a documentary there about people were talking about 90s metal, and they were saying that all of these bands, they all had like amazing frontmen. Yeah, and they were like really charismatic and good looking frontmen, which kind of like some of the 80s bands were really lacking. But you had all these characters that were like, extremely talented, creative, and they're just well put together. Yeah, they just seem to be naturally like that. Like Rob Zombie's still fucking go. Rob Zombie is he's another one that's probably one of my favourite.
They're all your favourite. But yeah, I mean, and that was the thing as well. Rob Zombie, it didn't matter. He was one of these people that he could just wear a fucking anything at all, a black sack and a fucking, a hedgehog on his head, and you just go, oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's a fashion statement, and he would just pull it off effortlessly. Whereas somebody else would be trying to style something like that, and he would just like, what? Try hard. But
this is the weird thing with Rob Zombie is, I suppose, why kind of White Zombie and Rob Zombie fits into the alternative kind of metal kind of like, kind of category, for lack of a better word. So they were going like since the 80s, and they were like, they consider themselves an art rock band, I suppose, similar to the Melvins and stuff. And it's one of the I suppose consistent things as well in the 90s. What helped, we were saying about MTV helped with like the likes of Headbangers Ball, but Beavis and Butthead, the amount of bands that fucking people heard through Beavis and Butthead, and like I remember people were saying, oh, White Zombie, they're an overnight success because of Beavis and Butthead, and they were like, we've been touring for like 10 years.
Yeah, we've been living in a van, travelling around the States
non-stop. It's not like an overnight thing. But the Beavis and Butthead, for people who aren't familiar, was these cartoon characters created by Mike Judge, who would have done King of the Hill, Tales from the Tour Bus, what was it, Idiocracy was a movie. He's done a load of movies, but they're like two kind of like metal teenage, and they look at part of the show, they break up the story of the show watching metal music videos and taking the piss out of, not just metal, but I think that's where I heard Primus first, actually. My Name is Mud, I think it was. But they had all these different bands that probably would have been on Headbangers Ball, but would have been later at night. So then it introduced it to other and
a different type of
audience. Yeah, and that was like a White Zombie with Welcome to Planet Motherfucker. They played that on it, and they were like, "Oh my god!" And people were like, "Holy shit!" And as well, oh god, I can't remember. They had like Attack of the Penguins, War.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Beavis and Butthead loved War, and they kind of really saw War. Yeah. With it, but what was it?
You were talking about Rob Zombie.
Oh yeah,
and charismatic frontmen in general, because that is the thing that like and that was the thing. People weren't afraid to be themselves and be like really different and quirky and weird and all the rest, but it wasn't this forced sort of like, oh, let's be quirky and let's, I'm going to wear this type of a shirt and I'm going to look like this and I'm going to like have this kind of personality and I'm going to try on this kind of personality and see if this fits for the audience. So there's none of it was pandering to the audience. It's just like, I am me, I'm a bit odd, let's fucking.
But that's what people were ready for it, kind of like at that stage. Like, I mean, you had punk pop in the 90s was like, probably Green Day were probably one of the most popular bands after Nirvana kind of came along. But you had that people were, they wanted to be quirky and a bit different. People wanted to get away from the clean cut kind of thing in the 80s and all that. People wanted to be like an individual, even though they just copied everyone else with stuff. But like, I was going to say, with MTV as well, Rob Zombie was a genius with that as well. Once some of these guys got into the flow of things, they used MTV to their advantage, and it was... Oh, I can't remember. It was like one of those daily kind of music things or a weekly thing, whereas people play music videos, but he went on to it to paint the set.
Yeah, he was always in the background painting
and he was only meant to be for one episode, but he dragged it out for like fucking 2 months. So Rob Zombie was constantly on TV for people to see and people talking to him. And as well, he had cribs as well going on. They used to do different things. Like there was one of them where it was like, I think Rob Zombie went around and designed someone's house, or or they played in someone's back garden for their birthday.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of that with MTV in general as well. It was like bands that go around and play in someone's local pub or their back garden or something. It's like, when Metallica coming around your local pub and all this kind of stuff, which is, they don't do stuff like that anymore.
But they made it more accessible, I think, for people to kind of, and as well, people got to see what these guys were really like, and they weren't putting on, like, I'm sure there was some imagery kind of going on, but they came across as being genuine, which was something that was lacking with a lot of hair metal stuff. And then like Guns N' Roses, like Axl Rose wouldn't do interviews, and he was like not known for attacking, kind of like
jumping into the crowd and punching someone with a camera. Like,
so people were like, fuck these people are down on our level. These, like, I mean, I'd still to this day I'd love to meet Rob Zombie. If I could meet any famous person, talk
about his horror collection.
Sure, wouldn't know what to say to him now. Would be
I like your hair.
I liked Lords of Salem. Even though other people didn't like it, and you're like, what do you mean other people didn't like it? But even whereas the thing, we were looking at an interview with him from the early 2000s for the Lords of Salem, where he's with this guy, and he was just like, I've never been to a musical festival before, and the guy was kind of buying into it, and he was like, tell us about I saw a picture of you with Ozzy and kind of like Rick James, and he was like, that was a night that we were smoking crack and we had like a prostitute tied up in the corner that we were putting cigarettes out. I was like, what? And he was like, I can't really remember because it's like your memory gets a bit fuzzy from all this crack. But he was just, Rob Zombie is a genuinely funny fucking man. But you had all the alternative metal scene going on, but that kind of seemed to, I suppose, start dying out in the mid-90s, as well as death metal started kind of dying out, because there was a lot of bands just copying them, mimicking. Grunge started dying out because you had all that, like bands like Bush, all these that I can't remember what they kind of called, but a lot of people came along, started trying to sing like Eddie Vedder. And that kind of started spilling into kind of like metal music as well, where you had that mix match of it, whereas people were just kind of like, this is they're
sick
shit.
Of this, I know.
These are kind of things, and I think that was where the extreme kind of stuff started properly coming in. And like, I mean, for people that were getting a little bit bored of death metal, because when death metal came out at first, people were like, oh my god, they're singing about murdering people and raping people and all this. And then I think after about a year, people went, all right, these are guys that are like, they're deliberately trying to shock, but it's just stupid levels of shock where it's like, you can't take it you can't take it seriously, where it's just like, this is it. And then when you see them and they're like in their fucking Bermuda shorts,
I know,
and you're like, oh, alright, this isn't scary. Like, whereas the music might be good. I suppose death metal then branched off out into technical death metal, which for me, which probably was like gent kind of came from to a certain extent. For me,
I've got a 12-string guitar. I've got a 15-string guitar. A 25-string guitar. That's a lovely rendition.
Yeah. But it was all that grindcore shit kind of going on as well. But where was it? Oh yeah, then black metal came along, which anyone interested in the history of black metal, go back and listen to our episode on Lords of Chaos and stuff. And I think that was people where they were like, oh my god, these guys are kind of the real deal. They're
not just singing about it, they're actually doing it.
Yeah, and musically, I suppose it was all over, and they seemed to be like just honest about it as well, where it's like, this is what our influence, we're wearing it on our fucking thing, and as well the production values weren't, it wasn't like these people were trying to be famous. If anything, they were going the opposite to it. And as well, there was something about the imagery. It's all a bit kind of looking back on it now, kind of like when you see someone in corpse paint,
yes,
you kind of go,
prancing through the woods, looking all sullen.
But like, I mean, this is pre-internet, and kind of like you pick up like well, maybe not Kerrang, but like fucking Terrorize or one of these things, and there was like these black and white photos of these guys, like fucking kind of.
Yeah, it did look a bit sinister, and you're like, who are they?
Yeah,
what the
and
hell?
with knives, and all reading about the murderers and the burning churches, and you're like, these guys are fucking.
They're insane.
Evil. But it was the sound as well. There wasn't anything like it out there, and it seemed to incorporate like all the elements. So there was a bit of a but it still stayed an underground thing. But I think you had a lot of people that were into kind of like metal, started kind of like going out that way. Oh, let's go back to industrial music actually before we go on with the black metal, because I think the industrial kind of feeds into the black metal thing as well a bit. Like we were saying, you had like Fear Factory, and I think Fear Factory. I remember listening to Soul of a New Machine, one or two of the songs on like that Got to Get Away. So I can't remember, and I thought that was a black metal song. I heard, even though I didn't know what black metal was, but years later I was like, oh, it's very black metal-y with it. But with the industrial stuff like Ministry and all that, that kind of like ended up taking on a life of its own. 9 Inch Nails became so fucking big. And like, I think it's nearly unfair to kind of like classify 9 Inch Nails as an industrial band. I think more of an electronic artist.
No, certainly. Yeah.
I think that, but people who are into Authecker will not like this at all, and all those. But I would put 9 Inch Nails in there in the same category as like Avex Twin or anything like that. It mightn't be the same kind of like, say thing, but like, I mean, because there's heavy guitar and stuff, and the people just kind of went, oh, it's industrial metal. Which definitely kind of like some of the songs on Broken were, and definitely on the Downward Spiral, there were some songs that were like very, very metal, but like when it went on, there was like Fragile.
It definitely went very electronica rather than industrial.
But that's what he always he was a synthesizer player, and it was just that it ended up coming out heavy. This is the thing as well, I suppose, that started happening in the 90s, actually speaking of bands were developing and experimenting more, where synthesizers started coming, whereas like there was this whole trash thing where it's like, what the fuck are you doing with that kind of stuff?
Get rid of that keyboard.
And then even when Guns N' Roses, when they started bringing in the pianos, and it was like, what the fuck? But people, I think, with the alternative music, and that they were a little bit more open to it, like White Zombie, a lot of stuff is samples, there's like mental fucking shit going on, and there's a lot of experimentation, which a lot of this stuff as well opened up the doors for new metal, which we get into. So we're kind of coming closer to new metal kind of thing. That's it,
and coming up to the likes of, say, an Orgy or something like that, one of those kind of bands. Kind of definitely, some of those. But anyway, sorry.
But I'm kind of like, with it, I suppose Rammstein would have been the peak of it. And I don't even know if you can. I wouldn't consider Rammstein to be industrial.
Not in the truest sense, no.
At all. Kind of like bands like My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, I'd consider an industrial metal band or an industrial band, whereas. But Rammstein, they're just more of a heavy metal band, I think. But because they're from Germany, they follow some of the kind of the patterns. So they have the synthesizer there and that stuff. They don't really use samples that much.
No. It's just
riff-based music.
Yeah, and it's just sort of heavy and clanky more so than anything else, I think. And I think that's what labels them with the sort of the slightly industrial sound, I think, really.
Yeah, I mean, as well, like all that stuff was going on, and we've covered it before, and with doom metal kind of started emerging in the 90s as well. Like, I mean, it was around in the 80s with stuff like Candlemass, and the Melvins, I think, were definitely a doom metal band. But then, like, I suppose, Paradise Lost, some people consider it a doom metal band as well. But you had stuff like Sleep, kind of definitely started. I think Sleep started showing up. Yeah, they did in the 90s. My Dying Bride, Cathedral, who I was talking about, their first album, Force of Equilibrium, was definitely, and maybe to a certain extent, the Soul Sacrifice EP, their songs on that, like Autumn Twilight, is kind of doomy, and oh god, what's that? I suppose Autumn Twilight is a bit doomy, but yeah, I Hate God.
Yeah,
who we talked about before, and Crowbar is a massive kind of thing, and then Sun started popping up as well around that time. But it was just the door was open for all these different bits and pieces. I suppose jumping back to Fate No More as well a little bit, because you had Fate No More going on, and Fate No More were that alternative thing, but somehow when they brought in that rap kind of element to it, which they kind of got And it's mainly from Epic and a few of those songs people kind of consider it,
where they're sort of speaking through their verses kind of thing,
And they had like Rage Against the Machine were massive. And Rage Against the Machine definitely fell into the alternative metal kind of scene. But they brought in, it was rap, but because they had something to say and all that, I don't think the term rap metal wasn't really used for them. No. They were just seen as an alternative because there was no one else really like Rage Against the Machine at that point. And then people started going back to